Hover just above the tree line and then move up and down, finally disappearing after about 10 minutes. This family member reported the sighting first to the authorities, then to one of our neighbors. He saw the same thing the next evening. Only his sighting came just before dusk, when the name Goodyear and the outline of the blimp were still visible. It was quite a letdown for all of us and proves absolutely nothing except that unidentified flying objects are sometimes identified and sometimes not. Nightline correspondent Marshall Frady focuses now on the ones that are not.
They look awful. They're ugly. They're homely. I'm afraid of them. Oh my God, his eyes. Oh my God. Oh my God, his eyes.
The voices and sketches of otherwise ordinary, quiet living folk who, under hypnosis, have recounted being abducted by aliens in flying saucers.
There seemed to be two small people near me and another taller person in a doorway. And there's some sort of like a free-floating video screen going around taking three-dimensional pictures of my brain.
Oh, good God. I'm going to tell you something, honey. I don't know what the hell it is.
New sightings and now claims of cosmic kidnappings. Our seemingly inexhaustible bemusement with UFOs is flaring again.
We find this unbelievable, and it is unbelievable. But what if it's true? If it's true, it's the biggest story of all time.
It's been the conventional sophistication about flying saucers that they're simply vapors of overheated imaginations, at best natural illusions, at worst hoaxes. Yet of the some 60,000 sightings since 1947, about 10%, it seems, can't be explained away. It isn't that we haven't been trying. A series of Air Force investigations culminated in the famous Blue Book project. But in 1969, citing a persistent absence of any tangible evidence, Blue Book was closed down. However, that failed to end the sightings and the government's uneasy curiosity about them. Official documents since released under Freedom of Information requests offer tantalizing glimpses. 1975, UFOs hover over high-security missile and bomber bases in Maine, Michigan, Montana, North Dakota. 1980, a brilliant craft is reported suspended over nuclear weapons facilities in New Mexico. And news accounts keep coming. In 1980, two women near Houston report radiation burns from a low-swooping flying saucer pursued by helicopters. In 1978, a television crew in New Zealand films these still unexplained images, which also registered on radar. Newsman Chuck Tuccaro reported that in 1980, U.S. military personnel encountered a craft of aliens near a base in England. There was an immediate top-level government reaction to his report.
Was an Air Force full colonel, Colonel Campbell, who was on the National Security Council staff. He then watched the tape for half an hour, and we watched him take notes for half an hour.
1986, a Japanese Airlines pilot over Alaska reports a vast shape with blinking lights looming beside his plane. But still, one of the most provocative episodes is one of the oldest, the purported crash in 1947 of a UFO near Roswell, New Mexico, when some contend a top-secret governmental cover-up began.
There is considerable information to suggest that there was a crash of such a craft.
These UFO advocate investigators claim that's now supported by this document, supposedly a super-secret 1952 briefing paper for then-President-elect Eisenhower, supplied them, they say, by one of their deep throats within the intelligence community. It describes a secret Air Force operation to recover the craft's wreckage, the finding of 4 small human-like bodies nearby. It is virtually certain that these craft do not originate in any country on Earth. But reporters were told the object was merely a weather research balloon. That last item, at least, is precisely what happened, according to newsman Frank Joyce, then a young wire reporter.
The first story that I put out as a stringer for United Press was received from the PIO at the Walker Air Force Base.
The Air Force's second story about the incident shortly appeared, and the rancher who had originally told Joyce about the bizarre crash on his land now told him it was only a weather balloon.
Well, Joyce, he says, they told me to come and tell you this story or it will go very hard with me. And he went into some detail on that. But he was quite frightened, and frankly, I think I was a little frightened too at the time.
But Dr. Jesse Morcell, son of the Air Force investigating officer, is one of the last alive who says he actually held bits of the wreckage.
They resembled I-beams that you could see had what appeared to be some writing or some sort of writing-like characters. Egyptian-type hieroglyphics would be the closest description that I could come to.
The 1952 document would also seem to indicate that all evidence was hidden away for study by a special ultra-secret investigative body called Majestic 12, or MJ-12, created by President Truman. Government agencies have denied to Nightline any knowledge of the MJ-12 program, and one, the CIA, styled the briefing paper a poorly done fabrication. Indeed, most physical documentation remains, after 40 years, still rather shadowy.
Here's a photomicrograph, two photomicrographs taken at different exposures.
But serious scientists now are pressing investigations.
Something is flying around, has been at least since 1947, and scientists have just missed the boat by ignoring it.
Fascination has shifted now to those who claim to have actually been shanghaied aboard interstellar craft by aliens who treated them rather rudely.
He did this blind testing with 9 abductees. The psychologist was not informed that these people reported anything having to do with UFOs. She said at the end of the testing that these people were sane, there was no problem, no heavy-duty mental illness, no paranoid schizophrenia, and that they all showed the signs of severe trauma.
As spirited as the believers in UFOs are those who dismiss them, like Philip Klass.
The fact is that if you'll look into it and dig into it as I have, you'll find it's a myth.
Of course, skeptics do strenuously challenge everything you've just seen. Still, few now believe we are unique in the universe, and as Arthur C. Clarke has suggested, any sufficiently higher technology would seem to us as magic. But all we're finally left with are questions, still as elusive as these heavenly apparitions themselves. This is Marshall Frady for Nightline.
When we come back, we'll talk with Phil Klass, a journalist who says that in 21 years of research, he has yet to see any evidence that UFOs are real. And Stanton Friedman, a nuclear physicist who believes that there is a government cover-up of UFO proof, which he says amounts to a cosmic Watergate. Phil Klass, an editor with Aviation Week magazine and founder of the Committee for the Scientific Investigation of Claims of the Paranormal, a group which checks out claims of UFO sightings. Also here in Washington is Stanton Friedman, a physicist who's been involved in nuclear space and research for such companies as General Electric, Westinghouse, and General Motors. He has studied and lectured on UFOs for almost 30 years and is in Washington this week taking part in the International Symposium of the Mutual UFO Network. Mr. Friedman, there are books, there are magazine articles, there are television interview programs which have very little time, such as this one. Give it your best shot. If you are seeking to convince the skeptical, what do you point to?
I'm seeking to convince the healthy agnostics. The skeptics don't want to listen to the data in my findings. I point to the 2,400 plus landing trace cases, physical changes in the environment, collected from 65 countries. I point to the 3,200 cases in Project Blue Book Special Report 14, 20% of which couldn't be explained and are all the characteristics we attribute to flying saucers. I point to the 3,500 pilot sightings collected by a NASA scientist on the West Coast. I point to Bud Hopkins' 140 abductees with a waiting list of 200, and an enormous amount of data in the form of documents, some of them obtained from the government directly, some not so directly, clearly indicating that our planet is being visited, that some UFOs are alien spacecraft, and that we are indeed dealing with a cosmic Watergate. For example, I also point to the 92 different witnesses that William Moore and I have talked to about the Roswell incident that was described briefly in the early piece on the program.
I'll tell you what, let me make it a little tougher for you. Instead of all these pieces of evidence to which you're referring, refer to one concrete, substantive, visible piece of evidence that exists somewhere, something that we can look at, touch, feel.
I think you've asked the wrong question. By the nature of the beast, the pieces that were picked up at Roswell, for example, which are described in the document that was alluded to earlier, are not available for your viewing or my viewing. They clearly are top secret, eyes only, something above that.
Understand, but for example, the abductees, and you say there are how many of them now? 100 and...
Bud Hopkins' group has looked at over 120 of those.
Now, none of them has come back with anything except memories.
That seems to be the case. They also come back with descriptions of writing. 5 of those looked at independently are essentially identical when none of those had any way of knowing what the other people had drawn from what they claim to have seen. So we have duplication that seems to pass any notion of randomness that would be attributable to phony stories, if you will.
Mr. Klass, what about the 5 people who come back make approximate sketches of something that they claim to have seen? Presumably they have not had contact with one another? I don't know.
Ted, they're as identical as you and I are. I would wish that we were as identical. Let me respond, if I may, to an issue that's come up here that I think is a very important one. These alleged top-secret, eyes-only documents provide ABC, provide the nation, the news media, an opportunity to find out for themselves firsthand what sort of nonsense the UFO proponents are spouting. I would suggest the following. If ABC thinks there's even 1%, even a 1% chance that those documents are authentic, launch an all-out effort. Go to the president of ABC, ask for 50 of your best investigative journalists, and within a month come back and report either these documents are authentic, we have captured a flying saucer, the government has maintained a cover-up for 40 years, or come back and report it's nonsense and there has never been so great a con job done against the news media and the public as has been perpetrated with the release of these phony documents.
Mr. Klass, on the one hand, you know, you've been a journalist for a long time yourself, that it's not quite as easy as that, but on the other hand, I would take part of what you have said and pose this question to Mr. Friedman. I don't know how familiar you are with Washington. I'm very familiar with Washington, and I know that it is almost impossible to keep a story of that sort of dimension without some leak or another filtering out from some part of the bureaucracy or the government establishment over a period of 40 days, let alone 40 years.
Ted, let me comment about that. One thing I am familiar with is I worked on classified programs for 15 years. I had a high-level security clearance. And essentially everybody I've talked to who also has had high-level security clearances agrees fully with the notion that secrets are being kept, that there are dozens, if not hundreds, of so-called black programs. I am not impressed with Washington's efforts with regards to UFOs, but let's face it, there have been loads of leaks. Many of the stories, the whole work on Roswell came from people who were talking about the pieces of information that they have been aware of. Leaks are all over the place. Willingness to follow up on the leaks is quite another story. I think that the people who want to keep secrets have done a very good job of taking advantage of the egos of the Washington press corps who think that no secrets can be kept from them.
Stanton and his associates have, I think, done the nation a service by making public these documents. And